Hello, everybody. We're back with another GPS Live. One of my favorite little things while that music is playing is watching the preview videos down the bottom and just watching everyone bop around.
Our viewers don't know about our behind the scenes dancing.
They don't know about the behind the scenes dancing, only the on screen dancing that we do when the music ends. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to GPS Live for the week of December 15th. Jonathan and I are here to talk about some cybersecurity news stories that we found. That banner has become a scroller, which is not.
It works.
It's new. It's fine. I wasn't expecting it. It's fine. Welcome to GPS Live. Thank you so much for joining us. If you're coming in live, if you are here, go ahead and leave us a comment. Let us know where you're coming in from. If you have any thoughts from last week's stories, anything like that, we can revisit some of those. But we've got some great stories lined up for this week, some interesting stuff that we found, including one of producer Ben's first real big finds.
Something neither that Tristan and I were aware of also, which is great.
Yeah, he found it so fast too. So we're going to talk about a lot of really cool stuff. If you're also joining us on demand, thank you so much for giving us some of your time. But jump into the comments. Let us know what your thoughts are as we're going through. We love talking to you guys and getting your thoughts and incorporating that in. Jonathan, how's your week been?
It's been nuts, man. I can tell from the amount of business coming in that is scramble season. For everybody watching, remember that the end of the year is coming up, and so either get everything done or it sounds like vacation's kicking in early. We'll see.
Vacations are kicking in early.
Very busy. I've also had some really wonderful opportunity to spend with family during these holidays.
Excellent.
How are you?
Things are going well. Things are, on our side of things, we're trying to wrap up end of the year projects and get everything done. Personal life stuff. We're busy, but we're enjoying things. But let's not talk about that too much. Let's actually get into this before we actually keep going. Especially this week, because of one of our stories, we do need to go ahead and say that the views and opinions expressed by Jonathan and myself are our own. They don't necessarily reflect the official opinions of GuidePoint Security. We are not like official analysts or anything like that. We're two guys just talking about cybersecurity news that we found interesting for the week. So with that, Jonathan, do we want to jump in to our first story?
Yeah, let's kick it off with something from the Elite Hacker News.
The Elite Hacker News. So yeah, thehackernews.com, this is where we found this story about a new group called Gamble Force that is targeting Asia Pacific area firms using, tale as old as time, SQL injection.
Yeah, blows my mind.
Blows my mind, right? It's been around since it feels like the dawn of computers and cybersecurity. We've always been dealing with this particular problem, and then SQL came along, and it became the kind of like option of the day, right, for everyone to use. So this is a brand new group, previously unknown. Looks like they started operations in like September. Has been targeting a bunch of Asia Pacific based companies, except for the fact that they've also now targeted an institution in Brazil, which is definitely Atlantic. That is not Pacific. And so it's really interesting to see that, this group started in September. They're already branching out of their kind of main base of operations area, but they're just using, for the most part, SQL injection techniques to gain their foothold. And then from there, using some pretty traditional tools, including stuff like Cobalt Strike.
So I'll do a little bit of a Chris Konaki breakdown here. What's happening is, for those that are not familiar, SQL injection is the concept of taking advantage of the fact that a website that has content generally stored in a database, and what we're doing is taking advantage of that query, that ask to the database of, hey, can you go get this for me to populate and fill my website with content? There are techniques to inject your way into that conversation and either pull more from the database or add things to the database. And so both of those kind of things are happening here. More specifically, they're targeting what's called content management systems. You may have heard of things like WordPress or Joomla, and there's a number of different web-based frameworks that are easily targeted through known vulnerabilities that are just go unpatched for years. And so one of the examples particularly called out is a Joomla vulnerability that has only a medium severity according to the internet, but because of the fact that there is the potential for injecting your way into the SQL query, the website can be essentially taken over and unauthorized access can be gained by an adversary. This is truly a hacking group, not necessarily like some of the other organizations we talked about on the show that are either more in the ransomware kind of world, or other types of different organizations like nation state. This is very much a group of folks that are using age-old techniques, as you said, Tristan, to break into targets. They're using a number of fun tools out there like SQL Map. Raise your hand if you've ever used that.
SQL Map. They're using DIR search, SQL Map, Tiny Proxy, Redis Rogue Get Shell, and like I mentioned, Cobalt Strike. You're smirking like I pronounced one of those incorrectly. I probably did.
Dir search. It's okay.
Dir search. Yeah. They're using also Cobalt Strike as well. What's interesting for this is that Group IB, the group that released the report detailing this activity, noted that the version of Cobalt Strike that they found on the command and control servers used commands in Chinese, but it is still completely unclear what the group's origins actually are, right? Whether they're a Chinese group or if they're just using a version of the tool that uses Chinese to accept its commands. So we don't really know much about this group aside from the fact that they've targeted 24 victims, including, or 24. They've had 24 targets, including 6 actual victims. The victims in Brazil was like a recent kind of anomaly for them. And so they've gone in, they've taken down this group's command and control server, they've notified all the victims and everything. But I think that, like you were saying, right, the fact that this has existed forever, and that these are tools like CMS tools like Joomla, WordPress, and others, right, that have these like long-standing, long-running vulnerabilities that, you know, I think in a lot of cases almost can't be patched, right? Like they're like, these are old tools. These are things that have been around forever. And this might be like baked into the code style vulnerability where it would require full overhaul to get rid of it, right?
There are historically a number of vulnerabilities. This takes me back to my days working in the web hosting industry in a data center, and it's always a challenge. I mean, the general lesson learned here is managing all of your applications with appropriate updates. As new vulnerabilities are discovered, they need to be updated and patched. I understand you can't just do that immediately. There is definitely a testing phase and a process to move it from dev to prod, but still keeping up on your updates. But it's going to be an ongoing challenge. I think we're going to see a theme today, not to foreshadow too much, but the idea that old vulnerabilities are here to stay, sadly, and we can always harp on keeping things updated, but techniques such as SQL injection, which we talked about briefly in a previous week, old memory attacks we're trying to get rid of. Well, we can use modern frameworks in the web to also help alleviate some of these database attacks that we're still dealing with decades later.
Yeah, and also there's the final thing that I'll say on this is, there's obviously staying on top of patches, staying on top of updates, but like we talked about last week, right, when it came to the memory flaws and things like that, the entire push there was was the government saying like, hey, we have to start using these security first languages, right? We have to start programming in these ways that are security centric and thinking about that from the jump. And that also applies to this one, not just like keeping your stuff updated, but this is a group exploiting the public facing infrastructure of companies to use SQL injection to access them and gain further foothold. It's not known what they're doing with the stolen information right now, like what they're getting out of these companies. No one knows what they're doing with it. We don't know where they're from, but they're using public facing infrastructure. And so it's important to look at that and say like, hey, as a developer, am I thinking about my input security? Am I thinking about data validation? Am I ensuring that if there's a form on my site that someone can fill out, they can't just drop SQL commands like into that form and have it just go back to my database? I remember there was a story way back that was I don't remember if anything ever actually came of it, but it was the fact that there was a guy in the UK who had just taped SQL commands over his license plate. Yeah, like it's a very popular story, right? Like it was very funny, But yeah, he discovered, hey, they're using a SQL database, so I'm just going to, I'm just going to have them drop the table, and make sure that even if I speed through a traffic light, I'm not going to get a ticket. So that kind of stuff is extremely important. We need to be thinking about that from the beginning when we're developing these public facing things.
Allegedly. But yeah, let's take this idea of absolutely being aware of vulnerabilities and their long-lasting effects of not updating things effectively, and kind of segue into our next story here, which is also coming to us from the Hacker News. This one's titled "The New NK Abuse Malware Exploit Using NKN," which I had just learned about today as a new kind of network. Blockchain tech for distributed denial of service attacks. Now, you guys kind of put this together, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around it because blockchain.
Let me. I think blockchain is probably less important to the story, right? It's definitely going to grab headlines, but it is new kind of network is a distributed blockchain technology, right? Or it's based around that. It was originally it was created as this peer-to-peer networking, essentially, right? So it was supposed to be like secure, private, decentralized peer-to-peer networking. It's a software overlay for networking. So basically, like you allow your computer to be used as a node in this peer-to-peer network. Which I think it's very funny. As I was reading it, and it was like, it's blockchain, and I was like, isn't this torrenting? Like this is basically, I remember how what I used to do when I was younger, and I would torrent something. It's like,
allegedly
your network, allegedly. But so basically, this what this group is doing, or this malware is doing, NK Abuse. It's a new malware. It is using NKN, new kind of network, to run distributed denial of service attacks. It is not something that can propagate itself. It can't push itself. It has to be delivered intentionally to a victim. But once there is an NKN node running at a victim, right, it can be used basically to say it can communicate across that NKN to give and receive commands to the entire botnet and use that for distributed denial of service.
So NKN at large has about 62,000 nodes currently in the network. And so this particular malware utilizing any of the 62,000 to communicate is kind of scary to think about it. It takes advantage of a lot of that unused bandwidth. Now, from the technical side, what's going to happen is the malware dropper has every type of architecture that imaginable that's supported. We're talking 386, 64-bit, even MIPS for those hardware aficionados playing along at home. And once this malware is running on the system, it joins as a node to NKN and is part of this backhaul communication. There's a couple other things. It tends to take a foothold, although you did mention no self-propagation. Once it's in the system, it has a bit of that rootkit feel to it. What I mean by that is it uses something called a cron job to survive reboots. That cron job is basically something that runs on an interval, and it makes sure that it's running this route, and it validates that it's root, and then prepares itself to be executed upon reboot every single time. So once it's gotten its foothold, which, by the way, here's where the kicker comes in. We're talking about, utilizing vulnerabilities that have been around for a number of years. It has been observed that one of the droppers made it onto a system due to the exploitation of the Apache Struts vulnerability from 6 years ago, 2017.
6 years ago with a 10.0 score.
Yes, it did achieve a high score. But that's a lot of the technical specifics about what's going on here. But that does lead us into something interesting also, right?
Yes. So this is as we were going through this, right? Ben actually did a lot of work on helping to find stories this week. And found not only this one, but also jumped in and said, hey, it's actually interesting. Something piqued my interest when I saw the Apache Struts thing. I knew that I'd seen that earlier or other times this week when I was doing the research. And then he pulled up the story from actually today and sent it to us. That is about a recent Apache Struts 2 vulnerability. So Apache Struts 2 Electric Boogaloo still coming in strong with some great problems to be resolved. But this new bug that's been given a score of 9.8 was disclosed just a week ago
Mhm.
when Apache announced that they had already put out patches for it and started urging customers to apply them immediately, which goes directly back to our last story, right? You've got these critical infrastructure applications, like these are part of your core business. You are using them. If there is a patch out for it, immediately apply that so that you are not vulnerable to these 6-year-old, 10-year-old, however many year old bugs that are still sitting around.
Yeah. Right. So Apache Struts, it's as we all are aware now, it's not necessarily an unknown name in many organizations. The old vulnerability from 6 years ago, although still being used by groups like this NK abuse malware, this newest one is also a remote code execution flaw. That means being able to run arbitrary code remotely on a targeted system with little to no interaction, authentication, or prerequisites. It definitely rings a bell of some of the past stuff. So as a reminder, not just to update your WordPress and Joomla installations, if you're still running PHP, but also to update your Apache struts. Thank you for letting our viewers know that there is a patch out there that can be addressed across a number of different struts 2 versions. The ones, for instance, it's infecting the end of life versions along the 2.0 to 2.3 stream, and then also the 2.5 stream.
I'm really interested too in the struts 2 vulnerability, just the technicals of it and the way that it works. You know, we didn't have much time to kind of like dive into it and read it too much, but as you've been talking, I've been taking a quick gander at the article, and I kind of, it's very interesting the way that it is exploiting this, right? It's using parameter pollution, so it's manipulating that request and introducing some additional parameters to a file. And apparently what happens with struts is when you upload a file, it creates a temporary file that's just deleted after it's written. But if that cached value exceeds a certain value, right? If that cache file exceeds a certain value, it just won't delete the file. And so if you can manipulate that parameter and get it to exceed that value, you can just then control that file name value for the temporary file, have it not get deleted, and then use that to upload your malicious payload directly.
Yeah.
So,
there's a number of tricks in there, right? One is landing a file to stay persistent on the system.
right.
But the other one too is that what's called a path traversal. Basically, if a file lands on the system, you may not know exactly where it is, or you may not even be able to get to it publicly. But path traversal allows you to place it artificially in somewhere else in the system, most likely in a directory that's viewed by the public, so that it can be accessed, triggered, and executed. And so you, rather than it being placed in some random location or a temporary location, you can put it exactly where you need it to be on the operating system.
Yep. And it is noted too that exploiting this vulnerability at scale is apparently much more difficult than with the previous iteration, the one we were talking about, CVE 5638, which is the much older bug. Sorry, got something stuck in my throat there. And that bug was used to exploited to hack Equifax back in 2017. So new version of struts, new bug, slightly more difficult to use, but still incredibly important to pay attention to. And it's great. I love the way this story came to us, right? Finding like, here's a new novel kind of malware that's kind of neat. And, oh, hey, it's uncovered. It's uncovered this whole new thing for us. But our next story, we've got about 10 minutes left here, and we've got 2 more stories to jump through. But this next story is really interesting because I think it's just a broader security conversation. So what we want to jump back to is that disclaimer at the beginning where we said, hey, anything that we say is not GuidePoint's official stance on anything, because this story does involve some active litigation, but it felt too important to me to ignore. But the story comes to us from Ars Technica. Jonathan, I know you were sent this a bunch of times. It came up on like every algorithm recommended it to me. I'm convinced that just because it says hackers in it. But this is a really interesting story out of Poland, where a railroad travel company in Poland hired some ethical hacking professionals to come in and help them fix some problems that they were having with their trains. And what this group is alleging is that they discovered code inside the actual manufactured pieces of the train that said that would utilize things like the GPS on the train to see if the train was parked for an extended period of time at certain locations. And those locations, according to them, included third-party repair shops that were not directly authorized providers from the manufacturer of these trains. They also say that they discovered code that would brick the train essentially if parts were installed that didn't have proper serial numbers directly from the manufacturer, so only allowing first-party parts to be installed in the train. And they wrote all this up and they sent it out, and they are alleging that these were intentional actions taken by the manufacturer to ensure that only they would ever be able to fix the trains. Now, very important, the manufacturer has completely denied these claims. They have accused the group of slander. And there's active litigation about this, and we are not taking a stance on whether or not this actually happened. But what it did do is it brought up to me the interesting conversation around right to repair and cybersecurity. We've been seeing a lot of interesting moves kind of from the regulation side of things around cybersecurity, but also around right to repair. And I think those two are going to come together at kind of this like convergence point that we're going to see very, very soon here.
There's a lot of key factors. It even got me thinking about a number of experiences that I've been through. For instance, there was a particular year I was at DEF CON where an individual was told very specifically to not give a talk about an airliner and some vulnerabilities that were discovered there. Trains are considered, at least here in the United States, under critical infrastructure. And this kind of thing, although not necessarily a life-threatening hack or compromise by any means, does lead us into a number of different directions regarding questions around ethical hacking, bug bounty programs, discovery and disclosure, but also, as you mentioned, right to repair, and some of my other favorite conversations. For instance, we'd love to hear your comments on open source versus closed source and the benefits of discovering vulnerabilities through community-driven efforts, or taking the ownership and having to find those within your own teams. There's a number of different ways this kind of conversation can go, as you mentioned, but I do find it interesting that we do need to remind everybody that there's a computer in almost every aspect of your daily life, and that computer can be developed to have certain functions, certain flaws may be inherently found in them, and whether it is developed intentional to thwart some kind of third party or intervention of manipulating these systems that it may be considered dangerous or life-threatening. We do need to remember that we are driven by systems like this every day, whether it's in our car, our smartwatches, all kinds of things like that, our thermostats, and each of these, in my opinion, right, because it has code, should be audited and reviewed thoroughly. I'm a big fan of the public perspective of bug bounties and open source. I understand that you can't always open source certain things like the train software or a plane's software,
right?
But you should care.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for me, what is kind of the convergence point between these two topics, right, to repair and cybersecurity, right, is the common argument from manufacturers who are trying to prevent right to repair laws and regulations from being enacted is that if they can't control the repair process and the types of things that go back into the devices that they make, right, then that could introduce danger for the consumer. I believe John Deere made that argument.
Yes.
Right, when it came to their tractors, and they said, well, of course farmers can't repair these things on their own because it's very sensitive equipment. If they repair it on their own and something goes wrong, it could be catastrophic. And while that is very true, right, Apple makes the same claim about
Tesla,
around laptops, phones, Tesla. I believe Rivian might be doing that kind of logic as well. But these are claims, and those claims deserve merit, right? Like they have merit, they deserve some thought. If there is not some kind of safety regulation around the parts that you can buy to put back into these things, then yes, there could be some pretty big problems around that. But the flip side of that from the cybersecurity perspective, and this is the example that I was giving before the call, I had for many years a router that I really loved. I had spent probably too much money on it. But I bought it for very specific purposes because it did very specific things that I wanted it to do. And then a vulnerability was discovered that basically came out and said, like, yeah, if you own this router, you probably are already, like, it's too late for you. And that wasn't okay with me, but I also didn't have the money to just replace that router right away. And so I was able to flash DDWRT or Tomato onto it. I forget which one specifically, and control, right, every aspect of that router and run my own firmware on it. Excuse me. And sure enough, lo and behold, the version of DDWRT for my router already had that security flaw patched out, and that still took like another 6 months, I think, for the router manufacturer to take care of. And so right to repair and open access is incredibly important, I believe, from a cybersecurity perspective as well, because when it comes to these pieces of critical infrastructure, if something is discovered that would allow it to be utilized against you or just even taken down, you have to be able, I think, to go in and fix that problem, especially in organizations as large as the ones that we work with on a regular basis, Jonathan, right? Mm-hmm. They have to be able, I think, to do that without risking, without the risk that the manufacturer has preemptively decided for them that if anything like that is done, the thing is just not going to work, because that will just completely bring down businesses. That's my opinion on it as far as right to repair goes. But I thought it was a very interesting kind of topic to bring up for the conversation. So again, we take no official stance on the legality of the story, but right to repair as a topic in cybersecurity, I think, is something I would love to have that conversation with our broader community.
Nice. Yeah. Well, with that, we are down to our last couple of minutes, and that should help us segue into our good news segment of the day, which is coming to us from SC Magazine, that Microsoft has taken down a number of websites used to create approximately 750 million fraudulent accounts.
750 million. That's so many.
It's not. And so Microsoft has taken the opportunity to seize a number of websites run by a Vietnam-based group. Like I said, 750 million. And what's interesting that I found about this particular article was this group was running a criminal enterprise utilizing a number of different accounts that are both compromised and created. They were also bypassing CAPTCHA mechanisms, which we're seeing more and more thanks to the abilities of AI today. And that they were doing all kinds of nefarious things that you do with email accounts, like phishing, identity theft, fraud, and even denial of service.
Yeah, they were reselling these accounts to a whole host of cybercriminal organizations and individuals. Like you said, doing some run-of-the-mill stuff like phishing and identity theft and fraud, but probably also using them for much more. I believe we covered a story not that long ago that was about being able to get domain privileges, like like admin privileges, as long as you had a Outlook or Microsoft account that you could just like if you had access to that account and you could do 1, 2, or 3 things over here on this domain, you could just join that account, give it full admin privileges, and then remove everyone else.
Yep.
So, when you look at 750 million accounts out there that are fake and not tied to any one individual floating around, that's pretty great if you want to exploit a vulnerability like that. But this is also part of a larger conversation about private sector entities going after bad actors, as opposed to the federal side or the government side and law enforcement going after this. So this is not necessarily a hackback, right? That's a large conversation on its own within cybersecurity. But this was Microsoft using the legal system to directly go after groups that they had plenty of intelligence on, in order to say, hey, we know exactly where these people are operating. We know exactly how they're operating. Please give us a takedown notice and let us seize these websites because they are being used for illegal activity.
Yeah, this isn't something new, like you mentioned, right? We can look back to stories where even Apple back in the day in 2016 cooperated with the FBI to do additional takedowns of their own. And so, considering Microsoft's kind of global footprint, the number of sensors and data that they can bring in from an analytical perspective of every bit of traffic and email coming in and out of their network, they can most likely hand over a dossier to the FBI before the FBI is even aware of something going on, because they're chasing a lot of things too.
Yeah.
And this is here's all the evidence you need, please perform legal action, okay, thanks, bye. But definitely interesting to see the private sector, again, not a hackback, but preparing all of the information needed to help aid in the takedown for cases like this.
Yeah. But that brings us to the end of our time this week for GPS Live. It always seems like it goes so fast. But thank you so much for joining us for GPS Live for this week for December 15th. We hope that we will see you again soon. If you watched it on demand, go ahead and still leave some comments for us. We'd love to see those and jump in and have those conversations, revisit previous stories. We've had that happen a couple times before where we got new information out of comments, or new perspective out of comments, and we jumped back to talk about some things. But until next week, I have been and will continue to be Tristan Morris.
And I am Jonathan Singer.
And we will catch you all next time. See you later.